Hello, guys. Welcome today. I'm so happy that you all have decided to join me to talk about how we can help consumers help you. So I just introduced myself really quick. My name is Jill Rosso. I'm a data scientist here at LucidWorks, and I'm on the professional services team, which means that I get to talk to my clients face-to-face or camera to camera in today's world. And I talk to people from all across the company, not just technical folks. So it's important that I have a way to convey data concepts in an approachable and understandable manner that has context for the personnel that I'm talking to. And to do this, I like to treat data like a story. And really, it's kind of like a mystery because it starts out with an investigation as you investigate both your quantitative and your qualitative data, and then it ends up ending with resolutions that are backed by little clues that you uncover during this investigation. And just like any good mystery, the endings can surprise you sometimes, right? You may think one thing at the start of the story, and it actually resolves completely differently. And this is why I think it's so important to analyze your customer interaction data, as it can tell you this story that you may not have known even existed, but it could be vital to the success of your business. So I'd like to start today's story with a personal experience and a good opportunity to smile. So I have wanted a dog for just about as long as I can remember. If anyone knows me, they know that I've talked about this pretty much every single day for most of my life. And at the start of this year, I had the opportunity to get this little guy. This is Teddy. He is my 6-month-old puppy. So to prepare for him back in January before we picked him up, I had a number of things that I needed to buy online and some different accounts that I needed to get set up to prepare for him. You know, there was fun stuff like buying him new toys and buying his bed, but there was also some more practical things like getting pet insurance set up and finding a good vet that I could take him to and preparing myself to be a good trainer for him. And naturally, as this was my very first dog, I had a lot of questions for the companies that I chose to interact with. So while unfortunately I'm not here to talk about my super cute puppy today, he was a catalyst for a few customer service interactions that I've had lately. And all of these interactions were very different, and they each left me with varying levels of satisfaction, or in some cases, some frustration. So let's take a look at what those scenarios were. And by the way, just by looking at these 3 scenarios, and just visually, not even reading them, you can probably get a sense for which interactions were more favorable. Right? The ones with the shorter lists, the ones that took less steps to end up at a resolution. That's going to be the preferred situation. But let's dig in a little bit deeper to them. So in this first scenario on the left, I had a problem with my insurance account. And the details aren't super important for this point, but it was a fairly simple problem. And because I felt like it was a fairly simple problem, the first thing that I did was look to see if this company had an FAQ section. And unfortunately, they did not have an FAQ section. So I was looking for my next best option in terms of the way I like to be serviced. For me, I typically try to avoid human interaction. And of course, I want my resolution as quickly as possible. So the next best action for me was to start talking with their chatbot. So in this chatbot, there was about a 5-minute discussion. It seems like there was mostly some generalized scripts coming from the bot. And then after those 5 minutes, it couldn't find a resolution and kindly asked me to call their help center. So that was a little frustrating. You know, I'd wasted a little bit of my time, and ultimately I had to do the thing I was trying to avoid. But I did need that answer, so I picked up the phone to call. The first thing that happened was an agent answered my call briefly and said, hey, you know, you're on hold, like you're not being ignored. I just wanted to let you know we do have your call. only to put me on hold and ignore me for about 30 or 40 minutes. Then once I was finally picked back up by an agent, it was a fairly quick conversation, about 2 minutes of me explaining my problem before the agent quickly responded and said, I need to transfer you to, another department, somebody who's better equipped to answer my question. And this was expected. You almost never land at the right spot whenever you get on the phone. But as I was transferred, I went back into hold and seemed to go to the back of the line again. So because I had to transfer departments, or because the agent needed to transfer me, I got punished by going to the back of the line again. And I've now been waiting for another 30 or 40 minutes. And at this point, the worst outcome happened. My call was dropped. And I didn't have the name of the agent I had talked to, and I still didn't have my answer. And so I'm frustrated. I'm a little angry, honestly, but I'm a customer there right now. I have an account there, and I needed the answer that day. So I didn't have a choice. I had to pick up the phone and call them again, going through this whole process over, repeating my hold, repeating my questions. This took hours, and it was really frustrating. This was a really poor experience for me as a consumer. Then let's contrast that with this second situation here in the middle. So this is a different company, and I had a really different experience. So in this case, I'm again an account holder, and this time I'm having some trouble with the app that I use to access the account on my mobile device. And for this particular account, I usually always access with my phone. I usually don't do a lot of intricate things with this account, so I typically use my phone for it. But it wasn't really an urgent issue because, I could just log in on my second device if I needed to. But this was my preferred method, so I did still want this answer. So the first thing I did was, again, take a look at their FAQ page. This time there was an FAQ page, so that was nice. I did find something that was similar to the problem I was having, and I tried that resolution, but unfortunately it did not work for me. The next step that was listed on that FAQ page was to send them an email. And since, again, this wasn't really an urgent issue, I thought an email would be a good solution. So after explaining my situation only once in that email, the immediate next email was my resolution. And it was a resolution that worked. There was no transferring, no email to say, hey, we got that request, we're working on it, just the answer. And that was great. I explained myself once and I immediately got the resolution to my problem. And I really honestly wasn't expecting that. I was expecting to go back and forth a couple times. But you might be thinking, yeah, well, you didn't need an immediate answer in that case, and it's a lot easier to make the customer happy when their issue isn't as urgent. And that's true. But remember, this email process still could have been much more frustrating had the respondent gone back and forth with me for a while or involved more personnel instead of immediately resolving my issue. They also had this FAQ page, which made me hopeful for issues that I had in the future with them. But just in case, let's talk about this third situation, which is a bit more parallel with the first. So in this case, this is yet another different company. So it's a third company where, again, I'm an account holder. And this time I had a question about my specific account. This was an urgent issue. I wanted that answer immediately. I needed it that day. And since it was a highly personalized question, I didn't even bother looking for that FAQ page. And I really, really wanted a quick answer this time. So I decided to just pick up the phone to start. And I was truly amazed by this experience, to be honest. I've really never had such a good experience with a customer support agency before. My phone call was answered within a minute. I was happily greeted by that agent who had already pulled up my account details and had an idea of what I was going to ask about. I recited my question only one time, and that agent was able to give me an answer immediately. There was no transfer. I was never put on hold. And I didn't have to repeat myself at all. Also, immediately after that call ended, I received an email showing me the details of the questions I had asked and the resolution steps that we had discussed. And I've had experiences before where that agent said they would send that email, but it never actually came through. But this time it was there, and it was there instantly. I was thrilled with this experience. I mean, they turned what I assumed would be a grueling and time-consuming task of calling customer support into really quite a pleasant experience. And like I said, I've really never experienced, getting that phone call picked up and immediately coming to a resolution. And because I was so happy about this, I started to contrast it with my first experience and how unhappy I was with that one. And knowing now that I could have such a better experience with customer support, I decided to cancel that account. I didn't want it anymore. I didn't want to settle for this type of experience when I knew that I would have questions in the future. And I didn't like that experience. So they lost my business because of that poor experience. And these scenarios probably are pretty familiar to you. They maybe aren't very surprising because as consumers, we've all had frustrating calls with support agents, and we all know that we want to get to that resolution as quickly as possible. But obviously, from a business perspective, we have our own goals, our own urgencies, problems, and metrics that we need to meet. And most customer support companies do keep track of some of these simpler KPIs, things like our case volume, our time to resolve that case, or the percent of cases we're deflecting. And we look at these things, or we look at these places we look for places that we can reduce costs, because that means opportunities to invest those savings back into our business for improvements. However, these are all quantitative measures. And while they can show us really good overviews of how we're performing generally, things like where we're doing well and where we have room to improve, they're still quantitative. They can be strongly influenced by outliers. So think about those really tough to solve few cases. And they don't show us specifics. They don't give us any direct information about the people who are actually interacting with our platform, our users. And in order to truly understand the whys behind these measures, why our case volume is so high, why it's taking us longer to resolve our cases, we need to be looking at unstructured qualitative data, things like the content of our support tickets, of the emails, the chats, and the queries that our users are entering. All of this raw customer interaction data is like a gold mine. It has endless clues to those whys underlining the KPIs you're seeing. And by taking time to be curious and investigate or ask questions around your customer experience, you not only get a holistic view of their problems, but you're also going to get the keys to solving those problems in an efficient and data-led manner. So I'll start today's story with some questions that are going to be guided by user pain points. And each question will be considered alongside customer interaction data. In this case, we're going to be looking at insurance data in the form of questions and answers. And these are coming from things like emails, calls, tickets, and even site searches. So as I go through this, I encourage you to think of your own personal experiences that you've had both as a consumer and as a business person, the things that you've liked and disliked, your pain points and your desires, to see if you find out that some of these points resonate with you as well. So the first thing we have to do as we're coming into this data storytelling mindset is to stop thinking about centering your support around cases. Instead, we really want to position ourselves to think about centering your support around consumers. You want to make consumers feel like a unique individual, not just another case or another part of your statistic. Ask yourself, how can I learn from the people that I'm already connecting and interacting with every single day through support? How can I know them better? And one of the most basic things you can do to start understanding your customers is to just ask the simple question of what are my consumers asking? What are they talking about the most? And you can ask this question in different ways too. You can ask things like, what are the top 5 questions or the top 5 topics being brought up today? What about this week? Or what about in this specific category? So, for example, you might have a dashboard which simply shows you the top 5 questions of the day, and you may be able to see that today your customers are curious about cost, they're curious about advice, they may have some personalized asks centered around health, or maybe centered around their own geolocation, or finally, they may be curious about risk. You might find over time that your consumers tend to ask longer questions, or maybe that your consumers are more general and tend to write shorter inquiries. You also may find that a large percentage of your consumers ask questions around the same topics, or maybe you find out that most of your consumers are expecting a more personalized experience by keying into these clues like their health specifics or their location specifics. Getting just an overall feel of what your consumers are talking about is always a great starting place. Then you might find yourself asking a little more specifically, what type of language are my consumers using? And here I'm talking about diction, right? The actual words. What are the actual words that my consumers are using whenever they talk to me or whenever they reach out for support? So as a first step to back this with your customer interaction data, you may drill down into the top 20 words amongst your cases, your queries, your emails. And predictably, you may not learn very much for this. As you can see, we're seeing mostly common English words that don't carry much meaning or intent, things like what, how, and can. These are called stop words. So as we're analyzing your data, we'll want to remove these things to get a better feel for the real meat of the data. So after removing our standard English stop words, you notice that now your top term is insurance. And that's not very surprising to you since we are in the insurance industry for this example, but it's also not very helpful in learning how your consumers talk. I know they say insurance, but what else are they saying when they talk about insurance? So you may need to add some more words to your stop word list to make it a little more custom for your domain. So let's take out insurance. All right, so this is better, but we can still see now the word life is dominating here. And we know this is associated with our life insurance category. So it's still not very helpful in understanding how our consumers talk about that insurance. So what would happen if we remove life as well? Taking both insurance and life out of the equation, we can start to see some more helpful terms, things like getting clues that our consumers are looking about cost and about buying, or maybe looking for information on coverage. But we still see a lot of these insurance types scattered in, like health for health insurance, homeowners for homeowners insurance, auto, so on and so forth. And since we know our consumers are typically asking longer questions, they're not really using these one-word keyword searches, maybe we should take a different strategy. Let's look at some longer strings of text to get a feel of how our users are communicating with us. So then I asked the question of, well, what happens if we look at the top 20 trigrams in our consumer text? So these are 3 words that are used in sequence with one another. And now we can start to see some themes emerging. So we can confirm our suspicion that people are talking about buying and that they're talking about coverage. We can also see consumers discussing various types of insurance policies that you can get, like long-term disability, short-term, things like universal life policies versus whole life. And this then begs the question, or makes me curious to know, does the language of our consumers change based on which insurance category they're discussing? I want to know more. And if you do have some predefined categories or some level of taxonomy, it's a good idea to drill into those categories or break out into those categories to do some further analysis. So here are 2 insurance categories, annuities and home. And just by looking at the top bigrams discussed in these categories, we can see how the language changes depending on what is being discussed. So we can see that on the left-hand side, when consumers are curious about annuities, they typically ask questions around investments, deferrals, equity, and they ask about concepts like fixed versus variable. And this is very different from what we see on the right in our home insurance category. When our consumers need support for home insurance, they wonder about different things like damage or coverage and things like costs. They also wonder about concepts like owners versus renters. So you can see that we see very different language depending on what information that user is looking for. And these insights can help us understand how our user's intent is changing depending on the category they're landing in. And insights like this can be very useful for segmenting your content, for providing recommendations that may differ depending on the category, and even for training custom machine learning algorithms to recognize which category a user is likely speaking about as they start to ask for support. All of these strategies can help us be more prepared to answer that consumer's question. So after taking a look at vocabulary, another good question to ask is, what are my consumers looking for the most? And again, you may be asking this in different perspectives. So for some, it might mean, what category are my consumers asking about most? While for others, it may be, what kind of specific problem are my consumers reporting the most? So you should always remember to take these questions in the context of your own domain and alter them as it fits for your own use case. So here's an example using those familiar insurance categories that we've been talking about. And here we're looking at the distribution of support cases for each category. And I say support in a general way because this data is going to be encompassing not only just queries entered on your knowledge base, but the content of those phone calls, the emails, or the support tickets themselves, right? So all of these different touch points have valuable information. And as we're looking at a distribution of support over our categories, we really want to be integrating all of those various touch points. So looking here, we can see that most of our consumers are needing support around life insurance. And then this is followed by auto, Medicare, health, and home. So after getting this information, we have an idea of which types of categories our consumers are hitting the most. And we should ensure these areas are running optimally and efficiently, as these are going to give us the most amount of opportunity to improve our support or to make a positive impact on our customers, right? We have the largest volume of support cases coming from them. People come from those areas the most when they're looking for help. So we need to make sure that we're doing a good job of servicing those cases. And remember that we're talking about customers wanting to be known as an individual. They're unique individuals with unique wants and needs, and they'll likely need to be serviced differently from consumer to consumer. So for those loyal customers that you already have on board, that have already started to interact with you, think about if they're receiving a benefit of being a continued loyal customer. Are you utilizing all the knowledge that they've given you over time to make their experience a better one? How can you best serve them? How can you best know those existing customers? So to think about this, I ask you to consider this concept of a user journey. So as you're collecting this user interaction data, like your queries, your emails, your support tickets, and your clicks, you should be associating those actions with the user that performs them. Doing that is going to allow us to aggregate up that information and provide this overview of that user's background, their affinities, and what they might be thinking about doing next. So let's consider this consumer X who's been with us for 5 years. And then think back to that first experience that I described having, where I first tried to search the site, then I talked to a chatbot, and then I was shuffled from agent to agent on the phone. During that experience, I had to repeat myself many different times. I re-asked my question in different ways to the search bar, the chat bot, and to the agents, hoping that I would be clear enough to finally get my answer. And it really would have been a lot quicker, a lot better, and frankly, maybe cheaper for that business if the first agent I was connected to had knowledge of all these other searches that I was doing before I got on the phone. They would have had this background information and the different ways that I asked the question to help them formulate a full picture and be able to better address my ask, or maybe to transfer me to the right person the first time. So not only can knowing what activity your users have engaged in be helpful for providing you some background, but it can also give you clues about tickets or support issues that they may be opening in the future. So you can see Consumer X has asked about insurance coverage for car damage from an auto shop. And though she didn't explicitly say she wants to file a claim or an auto insurance claim, we may predict and perhaps prepare for this consumer to file an auto insurance claim soon. Or alternatively, this consumer may have entered this question in our knowledge base and is now going to hop on the phone with an agent. That agent needs to know, how this consumer has asked that question, what articles they've already clicked on, and all the things that they've already done in your company, the policies that they own, the other problems they've had in the past. They need all of this information up front to help them make the best decision and give the best resolution to that customer up front. Okay, so we talked about consumers wanting to be known. They want to be known as an individual. We want to understand the language that they're using. We want to understand how to personalize that experience for their specific needs and wants. And we want to make it easier for them to get answers. Importantly, consumers also want this seamless conversation. And we just briefly touched on this. Remember, regardless of what support channel, email, chat I choose to interact with, I expect that conversation to pick up where it left off when I started in a new channel because I didn't find my answer. So if you know that your consumers typically try to self-service first by querying a knowledge base, asking a chatbot, or sending an email, then you should use all of the knowledge that they're giving you in these channels to inform your service when they finally end up picking up the phone or submitting that ticket, right? They've given you so much more information than maybe what was submitted to you in the ticket or told to you on the phone. And we shouldn't just throw it away, right? That's valuable information that the consumer has given us across these various touch points. And it's valuable information that could help us reduce the time to solve that case, for instance. So it'll give you a head start. You should collect that user journey and use it to your advantage. And to do this seamless conversation effectively, you first need to know where your consumers are coming from. It's important to know if your users are mobile, desktop, app users, or whatever other channels that you offer. You need to ask questions like, am I collecting and analyzing the interaction data being produced on each of these avenues? Do all of these touch points serve the same experience to my end user? Can they achieve the same level of service on each of these different avenues? So for instance, here you can see that most people are accessing the site through the desktop site. And that's not very surprising. However, you might be surprised to find out that your app is used much more than your mobile site. So when consumers are using their phone to access your site, they tend to download the app rather than using a mobile browser. And maybe in the past, you haven't put as much effort into developing this app, or you know that it serves a little less optimal experience than your mobile and desktop sites. And this could be a reason for increased cases, right? And I actually encourage you to break this down by caseload. So comparing how many cases come from users on a mobile app versus the desktop site. And if you do find out that we are seeing increased cases from your mobile app, that might be a good indicator that it's time to invest in bringing that app up to speed with the rest of your touch points. And perhaps maybe slightly more importantly, is where your consumers are going for support. So remember that I have a preference to try to self-service before I reach out to an agent. And that might not be true for everybody's consumers. So remember that this is all about testing our assumptions. We might assume that customers go one place for support, but the data may show they actually prefer to self-service or go to a search bar or chatbot first. So investing in the solutions that your consumers care about will contribute positively to those KPIs that you care about. So in this example, we've got many different options for support. So here we can see that the help center comes in at number 1, with chat and search falling not too far behind. Additionally, we see the social media block. So, as a business user, when I'm coming to look at my analyses, I know that in previous months, social media took up a really small chunk. In fact, it was used less than phone and email. But this time when I looked, social media has surpassed email and just surpassed phone. So to me, this is telling me that more of my consumers are taking to social media to get their support concerns addressed, and we need to contribute effort there to meet our consumers where they prefer to be serviced. Right? And then finally, seamless conversation is going to require you to recognize what your consumers are doing before submitting that ticket or calling the help center. So we need to know, did they try to self-service before they got here? Does the data from that self-service tell you that you aren't doing a good job of surfacing the relevant information for them looking for that solution? Could these cases potentially have been deflected had the customer found what they were looking for when they tried to self-service? So remember, by connecting the interactions our consumers have with various touch points on your app, we start to get an overview of that consumer's journey. And we want to look for points of interception here. So for instance, starting at the left side, if we were to see a visit to the FAQ page with no clicks, we can safely assume that they probably didn't find what they were looking for. In contrast, if we saw the FAQ page with a lot of clicks, but they still move on to pursue other options, they may have found relevant information, but it still wasn't exactly what they were looking for. However, as they then move into this query stage, we start to get more information on exactly what they were looking for, right? We get that raw text. We get more insight into what they're looking for and what support they're after. And maybe we use, over time, if we see users entering the same or similar queries over and over again, we may want to consider adding that information back to our FAQ page and eliminating the need to query altogether. Then we may have a user who still hasn't found what they were looking for and starts to turn to chat. So if they have chatted before submitting your Help Center ticket, we've talked about knowing the content of that chat to help you out, but you should also know things like how long that conversation was and how many messages were sent back and forth. If the customer is now submitting a ticket, it's clear that they did not reach their resolution that they were looking for with this chat. So having a lengthy chat conversation with no resolution could be a pain point for that user and could create a frustrated mindset. So not only being aware of this frustrating experience, but also taking that insight and asking yourself, is my chat really serving the user, or does it consistently bring frustrating experiences? This is valuable insight you can use to improve your self-service mechanisms, whether that looks like improving your chatbot, retraining that algorithm, or if it looks like removing the chatbot altogether if you really don't see any benefit coming from it. And then there's this third idea, and I love this idea. And it's that more than anything else, consumers want empowered problem solvers. And this is awesome because it means that making your agents successful makes your consumers happier. And as we all know, happy consumers are loyal consumers. So consumers want their problem solver to have both the knowledge and the authority to answer any question or resolve any issue that they have. Think about your own customer support experiences. Think about being transferred over and over as they try to find the right person with the right knowledge and the authority to do what you want. I think we've all been told before by an agent, like, oh, unfortunately, I don't have the power to make that change, or I can't do that for you, so I'll have to transfer you to somebody else. And if it were up to me, and I'm sure you feel the same way, the first person I talk to on that call would be the last person I talk to on that call, right? I get on, they hear me out, they have the answer, and they have authority to make that change. And then we both walk away from that conversation feeling positive and empowered about the interaction. They got their job done, they made me happy, and it was a good experience for both people. So here's some questions that you can ask to determine if your agents are set up to be empowered problem solvers. So the first one is asking about access. Oftentimes, you're going to have data in various different silos spread across different multiple data sources. Can your agents access all of this different information from the same interface? When you're solving a problem, the best answer often comes from integrating various information sources, right? We need to look at things, not only our knowledge articles, but also things like the cases that have been submitted in the past or the resolutions that were found for those cases. So at LucidWorks, we recognize this as extremely important, which is why we have connectors for numerous data sources that you're using already, things like Salesforce and Zendesk. So we know that not only do you want to know the knowledge content that can help you solve the problem, but if this problem has been solved in the past, we should show you that too. The next question, so if you do have access to all of that disparate data, the second question is, are they able to find the relevant information? Are your agents maybe having similar search problems as your end consumers? Do you find yourself saying, I know it's there somewhere, I just can't find it? Having a sophisticated search engine that can power things like recommended articles for the case at hand, or semantically deciphering the meaning of your text instead of looking for keyword matches. These things are incredibly important and powerful for empowering your agents to do their job well. And this has implications for many important customer support KPIs, like increased time to resolve the problem, frustrated agents that become less productive as they're searching over and over again, and of course, increased call center costs. So as you can see, it's going to be worth the investment to empower your agents to do well. And then there will always be a case when the first agent assigned may not be the expert on that case's topic. This is going to happen, but in order to kind of get the best out of that situation, that person should know who they can reach out to that is the subject matter expert or does have the knowledge and the authority to get this question answered. Sometimes we're going to need help, and knowing who to get that help from is not only going to speed up the time to resolution, but it can also help prevent some customer frustration from bringing in various personnel and having them re-explain themselves multiple times. So this is going to be another good place for you to implement things like recommendations, where you can recommend somebody who is a subject matter expert on the topic of the case or who has maybe dealt with cases like this in the past. And then a final question to consider is, do your agents understand your customers? And this goes back to knowing them as an individual rather than a case, right? Nobody wants to be treated like just another call that agent has that they want to just finish up and get through to finish the day. They want to be treated like that individual that you care about and that you're happy to be talking to. And they expect you to know what they've done in the past with your company and what they've spoken about with other agents in your company. So even if they've never interacted with you personally before, they expect you to know about the interactions that they have had with your company. So setting up your agents for success by providing that consumer journey we've been talking about up front is a great idea, so that when a new case comes in, that agent pulls up the case, they see all the background on that consumer, they know the problems they've had in the past, and they know the conversations they've had in the past. All of this information is going to be vital in providing a well-rounded support experience. So then, only once we understand our users as people, we know what their pain points are, we've thought about our agent pain points, and we've kind of created a story to talk about all of this in relation to our KPIs. Then we can move forward with solutioning. So now we'll talk about, or I'll show you how you can use these insights that you just gained, these clues from the investigation, to make data-led decisions in terms of solutionizing and implementing those features to solve pain points and improve on those KPIs. So let's imagine you're analyzing the content of your tickets, your searches, and you notice some common misspellings that are specific to your domain. Here's an example with the word annuity. So you see that over time, users are commonly misspelling in this manner, and because you're recognizing this pattern, you see that you're consistently missing opportunities to return information on annuity insurance, even though it is there. It is in the index. We're just not returning it because of this common misspelling. If this is a pattern that you're seeing, then you'll want to consider a misspelling check solution that helps you align to your user's vocabulary. For instance, Fusion's misspelling algorithm corrects these mistakes on the fly because we actually use those user interactions to power the connections that we're making here. And this can help a lot with the self-service and case deflection piece. Maybe somebody had entered a query and they could have found their answer by themselves, but because we didn't have this feature implemented, we weren't able to return the right document, and they ended up going on to submit a case. And maybe if after reviewing your search data, you may find some queries or support issues that perform really well in terms of converting, resolving that support issue, while there are some other cases that seem to have a harder time finding the right content. If you see this, doing this sort of head-tail analysis is a good option, and we can use the user interactions that we've been collecting to help us understand how both the long and the short tail queries were resolved. And if we know about the long and the short tail queries, and we know how they were both resolved, we can try to form some maps between our low performing queries and our high performing queries. And this can enable both our users and our agents to find the right answer, even when they enter what would be a typically low performing search. And then perhaps after evaluating both the content of your user queries and the responses from your agents or search results, you realize that your consumers use slightly different language than your knowledge base. So let's consider these examples in the gray box at the top. At the top, first we just have kind of a different term. So we may see that our users tend to say full coverage, whereas our knowledge base typically uses the word comprehensive coverage. And we would want to return the same documents for both instances. Similarly, we may find that users use a space or use abbreviations, which isn't consistent with how our index looks. But they mean the same thing, and we should return whatever comes back for these as well. If we do see this pattern in our user data, then we could consider a synonym-based approach to promote better self-service or more relevant results. You may also want to perform sentiment analysis on your unstructured data. Then take a look at the difference in the content where you're seeing negative versus positive sentiment coming from both your consumers and your agents. When do we see that negative sentiment? And what drove that customer to frustration in the first place? This is where we can remember that consumer journey. We want to think about, what did they do before they got to this frustrating experience? Was it a long wait time or a frustrating self-service experience? We want to look for places to improve and eliminate this frustration before it even begins. And you may see that agents are solving the same cases or related cases over and over again. And if this is something that we're seeing in the data, we want to speed up this process by showing them those similar cases when a new one opens up, right? If we've already solved it, don't reinvent the wheel. So if a new case comes in, we want to have maybe a little note on the side that says, here's some related cases to the one you're currently looking at, and here's how they were resolved. And that might make it a lot quicker for your agent to resolve the case at hand. And finally, your data may lend itself as a candidate for semantic search. So if you find yourself thinking things like, the information is there, we're utilizing key relevancy techniques to help increase findability, but we still can't easily find what we're looking for, you may want to start reaching for these semantic search capabilities. Semantic search can kind of be summed up in this way. So instead of showing me what I said, show me what I want. Show me the thing that I meant, right? And this can feel like magic to your end user. You know, you've imagined your experience when you've entered a query, you didn't get what you were looking for. So you go back and you try to edit that query, change your wording. Maybe I wasn't very clear. That's not what I really meant. But instead, there's no need to adapt your query over and over again with this semantic capability. You're not trying to hit those keywords that might bring you back those results you want. Instead, you can search the way you naturally speak and let semantic search figure it out. And this means we don't really need that exact match in the index anymore. Instead, we're utilizing these deep learning algorithms to capture semantic meaning from our questions. And user interaction data can actually be great training data for this algorithm after some proper cleansing. You can train it to align with both your user's language and your domain content. And this is super exciting. But again, along with every other solution that we've discussed, we want to be reaching for that solution for a reason. What data led you to make the decision to implement this feature? What impact do you think that this feature will have based on the data you've just investigated? You should answer these questions confidently before you reach for a feature, any feature, not just the cool ones, but any of them. Remember that you should always be thinking about what will truly serve the users or address the problems that we've just uncovered. So now you've asked those questions, you've hypothesized and uncovered new information about your consumer and your agent pain points. You've probably begun testing and acting on those clues you uncovered during the investigation. And now that you've implemented these data-led features, you might be thinking, well, what do I do with my user interaction data now? Is this the end of the story? And the answer is no, you're not done there. This is a feedback loop, right? Your users are showing you the whys of your current state. You iterate and improve on that current state, and then your users will let you know if it's working. Your users and your agents are ultimately the ones interacting with your new solutions. So let those interactions show you why or why not they're working. And remember, always stay curious about what new information your user interaction data can tell you, because it could surprise you. And yeah, now we've got some time for questions. Thank you for the cute puppy. He is very cute, I would agree. Okay, so we've got a good question here. It says, what if I've already implemented many of these features? Can my user interaction data still give me actionable insights? That's a really great question. So your user interaction data can absolutely still help you. It can help tell you if those new features are working well or not. They're also a great resource for experimenting. So as we kind of reach for these new solutions or ideas, we need some way to tell if they're working or not. And we may not know if it's a good idea or not. The only way to tell is to test it. And imagine you want to run maybe an A/B test for this new recommendation algorithm that you think might improve the experience for your users. You can use the user interaction data to show you which method is performing better for your end users. Additionally, your consumers and your platform are always going to be evolving, right? What works today may not work well tomorrow. And the way to determine why or why not that is the case is to dig into these user interaction data points in the way that we've been talking about. And the other thing is, even if you've implemented these features already, you may need to extend those solutions to new touch points that have been shown to not perform as well, right? So there's a multitude of ways that you can use your user interaction data, but if for nothing else, then as you implement those new features, you want to be using them to validate the features you've implemented, to show you that you've made the right decisions, and to show you the opportunities where you might be able to implement new solutions. Okay. And there's another question. Where should I run these visualizations, or how should I be viewing them from day to day? And that's a good question. So I think the first place to start is to go through this exercise of formulating the good questions that are relevant for your domain. So you should build out these custom dashboards that monitor the visualizations. You can use any of your favorite BI tools, right? Jupyter, Tableau, any of your favorites. But the visualizations that you build out should be guided by this exercise of formulating your questions or investigating, hypothesizing. And it'll be different for every company in terms of the content of the visualizations and maybe how often you need to refresh those visualizations. So for instance, if user behavior varies wildly for your domain, or maybe you know that you're constantly changing your content, then you may need to refresh more often. And then also you may have new questions that come up that you would like to address with visualizations. Right? You should always be curious and asking new questions. So there may be a chance to edit there and change your dashboard up, set you up to better answer the new problems that your KPIs are reporting. And remember that those KPIs and the qualitative data go hand in hand, right? We want to view them both together to get a full understanding. So your dashboarding tool should be able to display both of them for you. And then also remember that another really important aspect of this dashboarding process is that you need to be thinking about the data coming into the dashboard, the data that's powering the dashboard. Are you practicing good data cleaning steps? Are you making sure that the way you track user interaction data is set up to tell you the truth, right? So however you're collecting that data, is it actually being recorded in a truthful way? Are we able to go backtrack and find that customer journey that we need to be able to access? Am I recording things in a way that I'm able to follow that user interaction journey, right? So those are some important considerations in terms of making sure those visualizations are successful. And then, yeah, I think in terms of viewing them, it'll be, you can really use your favorite BI tool there. Okay, and there is another question about semantic search. It says, you talked briefly about semantic search and it sounded pretty cool. Can you tell me more about how that works from a technical perspective? Sure. So I won't get too far in depth into it, but essentially, this involves training a deep learning algorithm to align both your customer language and your domain content. So what we do is we're turning textual data into computer readable language, which is numbers, right? So to do this, we turn our text, our raw text, into a vector, which is just a numerical representation of that text. And we'll do this both for the questions our consumers are asking and with the answers and the domain knowledge that we're using to answer those questions. So we've got both questions and answers that have now been converted to numerical vectors. Then we're going to put all those vectors in the same space so that they're all have a relationship in space with one another, where some of them are closer together and these are more similar, and the others are further apart and are more different. So then when a new question or a new support case comes in, we want to use that trained algorithm to convert that new question to a vector, push it into our defined space, and then take a look at the closest or most similar answers and questions around it. And this gives us that bypass of the keyword search where, before we're looking for an exact match, and now we're just pushing things into a vector space and looking for the most similar results or the things that are closer by. So as an example, maybe I'm searching about options for my truck, and I'm talking a lot about trucks, but I never say anything about auto, car, or maybe even insurance to begin with. But that algorithm can understand that when you say truck, you're talking about cars, talking about auto insurance. We should slot into an auto insurance answer compared to maybe finding a match on one small document that was just talking one time about a truck, right? That's a great question, though. It's a very exciting tool, and we do have some resources on our website. Okay, let's see. Okay, and here's another question, which says, how can I collect the KPIs that you've outlined? Well, maybe I can push the slide. Yeah, cool. So a lot of these things may already be being recorded. So a lot of people are using tools that use like taggers on their interfaces from the front end that are already recording these things. So I encourage you to take a look at what you're already recording. But if not, then, so if we take a look first, for this instance, the NPS score, this is something, Net Promoter Score, that you would need to ask your customers about, right? So sending out things like a survey, how do we do today? And hoping that you get those answers back. Then there's these other ones like case deflection and case volume. And to get these metrics right, these are already in your wheelhouse. You know how many cases are coming in, or if you're not keeping track of that, you certainly should be. So we take the full number, and whether you want to consider case volume across all of your cases, or you want to look at case volume for specific problems, or maybe you want to look at case volume month to month, that's going to be a decision that you'll have to make on the business side in terms of how you segment that KPI. And then for case deflection, right, we want to look at times that our users have been searching or trying to do self-service and didn't actually make it all the way to that support call, or times whenever our FAQ or chatbot has provided resolution before that person actually had to get on the phone, right? And then time to resolve, so that'll be tracking agent performance, right? So the moment that ticket came in, you should be tracking a timestamp when that first interaction occurs. And then you'll know when that resolution occurs. Usually agents will mark something as complete or mark it as resolved, and that marks your end time. So we have individual statistics that we then can aggregate. And again, how you aggregate will depend on your domain and your use case, whether you want to look at time to resolve in a category or time to resolve for the last week or maybe the last season if you know that your domain has a lot of seasonality. So there's a lot of considerations to be had, and you guys are the experts of your own businesses, so you know more than anyone else what's going to be important for you to know and how quickly your business turns over and which categories or timelines you should be looking at. Yeah, and I think that brings us just about at time. So I just want to thank y'all so much for joining us today. I'm so happy to have had the opportunity to talk to you all, and we will be sending out a link to today's presentation. It'll have the presentation and the recording, all that good stuff. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.